Hello everybody, and how are you? I hope that didn't deafen you. Sorry, I keep forgetting how loud I clap. Unintentional. I hope you can cope with that. Right, here we go. Where did we get up to? Last time we had the conversion of Saint Winifred. Wilfred? Hang on, I shall look up the chapter title. Wilfred. Why did I think it was Winifred? Anyway, conversion of Saint Wilfred, and that was where you had some historic figure, Saint Wilfred, who had been down on the south coast again. I think we're dealing with the south coast still. In the time of, I think, the Saxons, and he was dealing with one of the local kings. The kings were for a lot more small regions than what we're used to as being for kings. Kings ruling over a territory. And he had been spending time with him, getting to know him. He and his assistant, his right-hand man basically, had a little bit of an issue with the fact that the Saxon king had a seal that effectively was his pet and companion, and was helpful for all sorts of things. And they'd heard the stories about how the seal they assumed that the seal was of the devil, because it would be able to provide the king with what the weather report was and stuff like that. And when they finally actually got to know the chap, it turns out that if the seal went down to the seaside and then came back up to the king's accommodation, he could tell from looking at the seal and the way it was responding to him what the weather was like or what it was about to be. So if it's frosty outside and all this sort of stuff, just because of the fact that obviously the seal had been out in this cold weather and things. So none of this weirdo, oh, so the devil. It turns out most of it was very practical. And like people have a pet dog that is very fond of them, but it can also live reasonably independently, it can think for itself, the seal actually was able to save them after they were shipwrecked. And one of the lovely things about the situation in the story was that St. Wilfred, instead of trying to pressure the king to give up the gods that he had been believing in, he said, you don't have to, just take your time, get to know what you need to know. And through the course of the story, the king acknowledged to his forebears the belief or lack of it that he had in their traditional ways, and that he was now going forward in what was appropriate for the time period that he was now living in. So St. Wilfred is held up as an example of how not to pressure people in this story. Anyway, so that was last week. And I should probably introduce myself to anyone who's new here. Hi, I'm Jev. I read old-fashioned children's stories. It's just something for streaming, for live streams, that came about during the first COVID lockdown we had in New Zealand, because it was something to do for me. It was something that was nice and quiet and gentle and calming, instead of being panic about the state of the world that it's currently in, and things like that. And also there were a lot of bored kids who were stuck at home, and so I felt it was something that they could do. Their parents could just say, here, sit there and look at that. It was only 5 or 10 minutes a day. Anyway, so now it's 3 days a week, and it's more like an hour and a half each time. Quite a change. I ran out of the stories I was originally reading, so I carried on and read some other ones. Not immediately, but a bit later on when I found some suitable ones. I carried on and read other old-fashioned children's stories. Largely speaking, this is a family-friendly stream. I don't swear, I don't get into inappropriate discussions for a family setting, but keep in mind that the sensibilities of authors from earlier generations, earlier time periods, are not the sensibilities that we have now. And so there are some attitudes in old-fashioned stories that aren't necessarily acceptable to us now. But then again, there are some things in old-fashioned stories which give us cause to stop and think about how we live, how we do things, and how we consider other people, the lives they live, and the way they approach the world, which is one of the reasons why I like reading these stories, because it helps me to keep my mind open to the fact that the world is much bigger than just my little piece of it, that the attitudes in other places and other times are different, and what may have been okay then isn't okay now, and vice versa. So, yes, that's us. Oh, and yeah, my stories, I interrupt myself all the time. I get lost in the middle of a page. I will look something up to be able to tell you the information, because usually nobody else who's in the chat can be bothered finding out and telling us, which is what you can do if you want to. If you're registered with Twitch, if you're watching this as a live stream, if you're registered with Twitch and you're following me, then you are most welcome to comment about something that I've said. Comment in the chat. Where it's appropriate to the actual part of the story that we're in, I will read it out loud. If it's just general chat, which I'm fine with, then I will read it between chapters or between sections. This book doesn't really have, it has sections more than chapters. It will have a whole story cluster, and in that cluster it will have a poem, and then it will have a story, and then it will have another poem before we get on to the next section, and that's how this particular book works. So in the breaks, I'll happily read what's in the chat out to you, in case you happen to be watching somewhere where you can't see the chat, and if there's any responses, I will give those as well. If you're watching this on YouTube, you will have no idea what I'm talking about, because we don't have a chat panel alongside what I'm where you see me. You just see the video screen. If you want to be a lot more actively involved with the storytelling, with finding out things, giving me definitions of words, supplying even your own experiences where they're relevant for a story, then please come and join in with the live streaming on Twitch. I stream 3 days a week. At New Zealand time is 3 p.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Google is your friend. Look up when that is for you. Monday, Wednesday and Friday, 3 p.m. New Zealand current time. So at the moment it's daylight savings time. Later on in the year it won't be. And Google will tell you what time that is for you so that you can join in. It's much more fun actually doing it live rather than just watching a video. Although if you can't make it when I'm reading live, that's okay too. Those of you who are watching on YouTube, you have a huge benefit. There are drawbacks and benefits to both ways of doing it. If you're watching it watching the recordings over on YouTube, then you have the benefit of, as long as it's not one that has only just released, being able to watch the whole of a book right through from beginning to end, because I put the videos into playlists for each book. There's a couple where you've got 2 books in one playlist, or like Millie Molly Mandy, all of the books are in one playlist, because the book I started reading from was actually a compilation book which had stories from various original books that had been published. It was one of those collections of stories that modern publishers will do to get people interested in the old stories. Anyway, so benefits of both ways of doing it, but if you want to be involved in it here and now, then join us when I live stream on Twitch. It's free, just like watching things on YouTube is free. If you want to comment, you will need to register, but once again, that is also free. Thank you for being here, Dean. It's great to have you here. What else have I got to tell you? Oh yeah, that's right. I was talking about the way I read, and I just whacked my microphone. Sorry about the loud noise in your ears. Some people ask me what it's like, because they hear that I read stories online. They say, well, what's it like? Is that like listening to an audiobook? And I say, yeah, kind of. Audiobooks, the readers who read audiobooks tend to be excellent at what they do. They seem to be able to read without mistakes. They don't get lost on the page. They don't change the pronunciation of something half a dozen times within one chapter, which I do. They usually do very good accents, and I'm terrible at accents. They all come out the same. I think it's some big mix up between Cornwall, Devon, Somerset and Yorkshire, of all places. I have no idea why, but that's just what comes out. So it's worth a laugh. You're most welcome to laugh at me if you need to. Not a problem. So I tend to describe the way I read as more like bedtime stories, where I don't know if you remember having bedtime stories, but your parents or whoever was reading to you would read something out and something wouldn't make sense. And so you'd interrupt them. And if they were someone who actually understood a child's inquisitiveness, they would stop the reading. They would explain what it was that didn't make sense so that you understood it, so you could get more out of the story. And then they would carry on reading. They might go back over the last little bit again so that you now understood it. And also so you could pick up on where it was you'd got to and then keep reading. And that is more like the way I read, except that because most of the time people aren't actually saying anything in the chat, I will have a tendency to interrupt myself instead of waiting for you to interrupt me. So there you go. That's who I am. I'm in New Zealand. I'm Jev. Around the internet, I am Jev. That's who I am, that's where I am, and that's what I do. So let's get on with reading. We are currently reading Rewards and Fairies by Rudyard Kipling, and the section that we are on, which is about 3/4 of the way through the book, I think, but I'm not sure, because the ebooks that I look at have a progress bar, but sometimes they show all of the extra stuff that Project Gutenberg has put in at the end of a book to do with their editing and who scanned it and who did this, that and everything else and what corrections they had to make because it was scanned from a really old book and the punctuation looked different every page and all that sort of hoo-ha. And sometimes the progress through the book, this little bit down here, so you can see we're up to, I'll tap the screen, it went away. That little dot there shows where we're up to, and we still have that much to go. Now, sometimes that grey bit at the end is just the story. Sometimes it's all that extra hoo-ha that I just told you about. So I don't know how far through the book we are. I'm sorry, but we shall see, shan't we? Right, we are reading the section called A Doctor of Medicine. And we will start with the poem. I'm just propping my iPad up. In case you're wondering, it's an old iPad mini. It's a first generation iPad mini. And it's been given to me by someone very special to me. And I'm delighted that it still works for this because you can't put apps on it anymore. It's too old for that. It doesn't do any updates, but it's great for downloading ebooks and reading them because that functionality is built into it. So I haven't lost it. It's wonderful. Right. We shall read An Astrologer's Song, which is the first poem for today. An Astrologer's Song. To the heavens above us, O look and behold, the planets that love us all harnessed in gold. What chariots, what horses against us shall bide, while the stars in their courses do fight on our side. All thought, all desires that are under the sun are one with their fires, as we also are one. All matter, all spirit, all fashion, all frame, receive and inherit their strength from the same. And then there's a little section in brackets, but it's still poetic. O man that deniest all power save thine own, their power in the highest is mightily shown, not less in the lowest that power is made clear. O man, if thou knowest, what treasure is here? And that's the end of that parentheses, and we shall carry on with the rest of the poem. Earth quakes in her throes, and we wonder for why, but what did I say about me mucking up? Right, we'll do that again. Earth quakes in her throes, and we wonder for why, but the blind planet knows when her ruler is nigh, and, attuned since creation, to perfect accord, she thrills in her station and yearns to her Lord. The waters have risen, the springs are unbound, the floods break their prison, and raven around. No rampart withstands them. Their fury will last till the sign that commands them sinks low or swings past. Through abysses unproven and gulfs beyond thought. Our portion is woven, our burden is brought, yet they that prepare it, whose nature we share, must make us who must bear it. I feel like I missed a line there. I'll read that whole stanza again. Through abysses unproven and gulfs beyond thought, our portion is woven, our burden is brought, and yet they prepare it, yet they that prepare it, whose nature we share, make us who must bear it. 2, 4, 6, 7. I was right. There's only 7 lines in that. All the others have been 8. Anyway, we'll carry on. Well able to bear, though terrors o'ertake us, we'll not be afraid, no power can unmake us, save that which has made, nor yet beyond reason, nor hope shall we fall. All things have their seasons, and mercy crowns all. He plays a little fast and loose with a number of lines. I'm not sure why, but that's just the way it goes. Then doubt not, ye fearful, the Eternal is King. Up, heart, and be cheerful, and lustily sing. What chariots, what horses against us shall bide, while the stars in their courses do fight on our side? And that's the end of the poem. And we shall get on to today's story, which is A Doctor of Medicine. I'm just going to check something here that I think may be missing on my other screen. Sorry. No, not that. I'm not quite sure why. That looks like there's something missing. Hang on. No, I can't see it. It just looks slightly different to usual. But that's okay. We'll carry on with the story in just a moment. I just have to paste something over here. Yes, I do actually kind of know what I'm doing. It's just, it's not the fastest. We'll get there. Nearly there. Right, here we go. On with the story. A Doctor of Medicine. Don't know, we'll find out. They were playing hide and seek with bicycle lamps after tea. They being Dan and Una. And the only reason I'm telling you, even though the story is kind of going to explain that, is because there's a bigger break between chapters, sections, for us than what there are for most people when they're just reading a book. Dan had hung his lamp on the apple tree at the end of the hellebore bed in the walled garden. Hellebore is a type of flower, type of plant. And you can look that one up, and I shall type it into the chat box so you can. There you go. There's the word that you can look up to see what the flowers look like. Dan had hung his lamp on the apple tree at the end of the hellebore bed in the walled garden and was crouched by the gooseberry bushes, ready to dash off when Una should spy him. He saw her lamp come into the garden and disappear as she hid it under her cloak. While he listened for her footsteps, somebody, they both thought it was Phillips the gardener, coughed in the corner of the herb beds. "All right," Una shouted across the asparagus. "We aren't hurting your old beds, Phillipsy." Phipsy is what their nickname is, for obviously, for their... I'm just writing this down. Bike lamp. I have a picture in my mind of the sort of bike lamp, just because they were fairly early ones at this stage. So they both thought it was Phillips the gardener, who would be upset if they were disrupting his garden beds. That's why. She flashed her lantern towards the spot, and in its circle of light they saw a Guy Fawkes-looking man in a black cloak and a steeple-crowned hat. That's one of those tall, pointy ones. Kind of like what we perceive the modern interpretation of a witch's hat, I suppose. they were originally based on an actual type of hat, I guess. Anyway, the chap, dressed like, looking a bit like Guy Fawkes, walking down the path besides Puck. They ran to meet him, and the man said something to them about rooms in their head. After a time, they understood he was warning them not to catch colds. "You've a bit of a cold yourself, haven't you?" said Una, for he ended all his sentences with a consequential cough. Puck laughed. "Child," the man answered, "if it hath pleased heaven to afflict me with an infirmity—" "Nay, nay," Puck struck in. "The maid spoke out of kindness. I know that half your cough is but a catch, to trick the vulgar, and that's a pity. There's honesty enough in you, Nick, without rasping and hawking." Hawking being what we when I was growing up called hoiking, which is where you clear your throat to spit the phlegm out. Yeah. Grew up in the country. Not a problem. "Good people," the man shrugged his lean shoulders, "the vulgar crowd love not truth unadorned." The vulgar crowd love not truth unadorned. They like things to be fancy. "Wherefore we philosophers must needs dress her to catch their eye or their ear." "What do you think of that?" said Puck solemnly to Dan. "I don't know," he answered. "It sounds like lessons." Schoolwork. "Ah, well, there have been worse men than Nick Culpepper to take lessons from. Now, where can we sit that's not indoors?" So I'm going to write that name down. Nick, tell me what you think his name is in history. Culpepper. I know what his first name actually was. This is an historical figure woven into our story so the children can learn something. Nicholas Culpepper. I'll write that down for you too. NicholasCulpepper. Nicholas Culpepper. You can look him up and find out what he's actually famous for. I'm going to guess that it's... Sorry, I'm just checking my footrest has moved and it's a bit noisy. I'm just moving it so that it's out of the way. I'm going to guess that he's in this story so that the children can learn a little bit about medical history. There you go. "Ah, well, there have been worse men than Nick Culpepper to take lessons from. Now, where can we sit that's not outdoors?" said Puck. "In the haymow next to old Middenborough," Dan suggested. "He doesn't mind." "Eh?" Mr. Culpepper was stooping over the pale hellebore blooms by the light of Una's lamp. "Does Master Middenborough need my poor services, then?" "Save him? No," said Puck. "But he is but a horse, next door to an ass, as you'll see presently. Come." So Middenborough is the horse, and this is the haymow. This is the place where the hay is stored, probably for the animal feed. Their shadows jumped and slid on the fruit tree walls. They filed out of the garden by the snoring pig pound, that's the pig pen, where the pigs are snoring, and the crooning hen house, to the shed where Middenborough, the old lawnmower pony, lives. His friendly eyes showed green in the light as they set their lamps down on the chickens' drinking trough outside, and pushed past to the haymow. Mr. Culpepper stooped at the door. It's obviously a low door. "Mind where you lie," said Dan. "This hay's full of hedge brishings." Those would be little bits and pieces that have fallen out of the hedges, I would think. In, said Puck. "You've lain in fouler places than this, Nick. Ah, let us keep touch with the stars." He kicked open the top of the half door and pointed up to the clear sky. There be the planets you conjure with. What does your wisdom make of that wandering and variable star behind those apple boughs?" The children smiled. A bicycle that they knew well was being walked down the steep lane. So it's not a wandering star, it's a bicycle lamp. "Where?" said Mr. Culpepper, leaned forward quickly. "That? Some countryman's lantern." "Wrong, Nick," said Puck. 'Tis a singular bright star in Virgo, declining towards the house of Aquarius, the water carrier, who hath lately been afflicted by Gemini. Aren't I right, Una? Mr. Culpepper snorted contemptuously. No, it's the village nurse going down to the mill about some fresh twins that came there last week. Nurse. Nurse, Una called as the light stopped on the flat. When can I see the Morris twins? And how are they? Next Sunday, perhaps. Doing beautifully, the nurse called back, and with a ping, ping, ping of the bell, brushed round the corner. So, Puck was kind of telling the truth. He was using the facts of the actual to use descriptive words to do with the stars, to do with astrology. There you go. Singular bright star in Virgo, declining towards the house of Aquarius, the water carrier. Okay. The nurse is probably a single woman whose job is to deliver babies. Declining, coming down the hill towards the house of the water carrier, that's the mill house. The water carrier who hath lately been afflicted by Gemini, that's the twins. And that was it, that some twins had recently been born. So Puck was paying a little bit fast and loose with the terminology. Right, next Sunday perhaps, blah, blah, blah. Her uncle's a veterinary surgeon near Banbury, Una explained, and if you ring her bell at night, it rings right beside her bed, not downstairs at all. Then she jumps up, she always keeps a pair of dry boots in the fender, you know, and goes anywhere she's wanted. We help her bicycle through gaps sometimes. Most of her babies do beautifully. She told us so herself. I doubt not, then, that she reads in my books, said Mr. Culpepper quietly. Twins at the mill, he muttered half aloud. And again he saith, return, ye children of men. Are you a doctor or a rector? A rector is someone who's involved with the church. And let's find out what it actually is. Rector. It's a member of the clergy. A rector is in an ecclesiastical sense a cleric who functions as an administrative leader in some denominations. In contrast, a vicar is also a cleric but functions as an assistant and representative of an administrative leader. Okay, so a rector is actually basically a church secretary kind of thing. In one time period, it was considered quite a position to hold. So we shall carry on with reading. Sorry, some of the stories have lots of new words that it helps if you understand what they're about, and other ones we can just brush past them. And I never quite know with Mr. Kipling. Just don't ask me to read the Latin bits, please. Terrible. I'm absolutely terrible at Latin because I never learnt it. Anyway, are you a doctor or a rector? Una asked, and Puck, with a shout, turned head over heels in the hay. In other words, he thought that was hilarious. But Mr. Culpepper was quite serious. He told them that he was a physician astrologer, a doctor who knew all about the stars as well as all about herbs for medicine. He said that the sun, the moon, and 5 planets called Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, Saturn, and Venus governed everybody and everything in the world. I shall find out. I know I've asked you to, but I'm going to find out who Nicholas Culpepper is. Just because I think it's very relevant for the story. Now, in the old days, medicine there were 2 main aspects to medical practices. One was reading the stars and doing astrology like birth charts for people, because that was supposedly influenced very strongly who they were and their health. And others were ones who practiced with herbal medicines. And when society went to extremes, they were very much looked down on and shunned and called witches and burnt at the stake and things like that, because people didn't understand what they were doing. Now, yes, there was a lot of superstition involved on both sides, obviously. There was a lot of superstition involved, but there were still certain foundational things that were accurate in their time for medical practice. So some of the superstitions involved with different herbs and various plants and things that you used, very much superstition, but there are other aspects that were accurate to modern medical practice. So willow bark especially, but willow was used for pain. Did you know that aspirin, one of our earlier pain medications, was originally extracted from willow bark? They recognised that it actually did do what the medical people were saying it did. The supposedly witchy type medical people said it did. And they discovered that, yes, there is a chemical in there that does have some very good properties that we can use. And so therefore they initially were extracting it, and later on I think they synthesized it, which means they made it in a laboratory without using the plant. Which possibly, I mean, you can measure things better when it's been produced in controlled circumstances, especially if it's by putting this chemical with that chemical, you know exactly how much you're going to get. But I wouldn't be surprised if there are some aspects of the things that are extracted from plants where if you have it in its original format, it's actually safer because there are other chemicals that the plant produces that support how that main chemical works, but also have protective properties. So like aspirin is known to actually cause stomach irritation. There may well be something in willow that helps to soothe the stomach and prevent stomach irritation when it's used in balance with the salicylic acid, which I think is what it's called. That is the primary ingredient in aspirin. So there you go. They weren't all witches. They actually did have some scientific basis, and it was usually based on observation. They had seen that this did actually work. There were some weird things that happened as well too. But the people who did the astrology to do with your health considered that the people who did stuff to do with herbs for your health were a little bit strange and behind the times. I think this story may address a little bit of both of that. We'll find out. And by the way, Nicholas Culpepper, 18th of October 1616 through to the 10th of January 1654. So that means he was 37. He didn't get very old, did he? Wrote a book called The English Physician, which was later called The Complete Herbal, which was a source of pharmaceutical and herbal law of the time. And he also wrote Astrological Judgment of Diseases from the Decumbiture of the Sick, one of the most detailed works on medical astrology in early modern Europe. There you go. He catalogued hundreds of outdoor medicinal herbs. He told off people who were his contemporaries, that's people from his generation, also practicing in similar ways, for the methods that they used, all sorts of things like that. So in some ways he was quite revolutionary, but it sounds also like he's still quite set in his ways. We'll find out. He seems to take offence at things a bit easily. I wonder if that's going to come into the story as well. Takes it very seriously. We shall read the book. So Una asked if he was a doctor or a rector, because he was talking like a sort of like a words person from the church in those days. Mr. Culpepper was quite serious. He said that the sun, the moon, and 5 planets called Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, Saturn, and Venus governed everybody and everything in the world. They all lived in houses. He mapped out some of them against the dark with a busy forefinger, and they moved from house to house like pieces at draughts, and they went loving and hating each other all over the skies. If you knew their likes and dislikes, he said, you could make them cure your patient and hurt your enemy, and find out the secret causes of things. He talked of these 5 planets as though they belonged to him, or as though he were playing long games against them. The children burrowed in the hay up to their chins and looked out over the half-door at the solemn, star-powdered sky till they seemed to be falling upside down into it, while Mr. Culpepper talked about trines and oppositions and conjunctions and sympathies and antipathies in a tone that just matched things. A rat ran between Middenborough's feet, and the old pony stamped. Mid hates rats, said Dan, and passed him over a lock of hay. Gave him something as a treat to soothe him after the rat. Divine astrology tells us, said Mr. Culpepper, the horse being a martial beast that beareth man to battle. Martial means to do with war, military purposes. Hang on, sorry. Being a martial beast that beareth man to battle belongs naturally to the red planet, Mars, the Lord of War. I would show you him, but he's too near his setting. In other words, he's too low in the sky. Rats and mice doing their businesses by night come under the dominion of Our Lady of the Moon. Now, between Mars and Luna, the one red, t'other white, the one hot, t'other cold, and so forth, stands, as I have told you, a natural antipathy, which is like an enmity, but not harsh and active. It's just an againstness. It's the only way I can think of putting it. Antipathy, or as you say, hatred, which antipathy their creatures do inherit. Whence, good people, you may both see and hear your cattle stamp in their stalls for the self-same causes as decree the passages of the stars across the unalterable face of heaven. That's that throat-clearing thing. Puck lay along, chewing a leaf. They felt him shake with laughter, and Mr. Culpepper sat up stiffly. I myself, said he, have saved men's lives, and not a few neither, by observing at the proper time — there is a time, mark you, for all things under the sun — by observing, I say, so small a beast as a rat in conjunction with so great a matter as this dread arch above us. Dread as in awesome, amazing, but something that is beyond us. He swept his hand across the sky. I did it right then. Yet there are those, he went on sourly, who have years without knowledge. Right, said Puck. No fool like an old fool. Mr. Culpepper wrapped his cloak round him and sat still while the children stared at the Great Bear on the hilltop. The Great Bear is one of the constellations. Ursa Major, I would think. Ursa being the bear. Right, and we shall carry on. Mr. Culpepper, oh yeah, I've got that. While the children stared at the Great Bear on the hilltop. Give him time, Puck whispered behind his hand. He turns like a timber tug, all of a piece. I have no idea what a timber tug is, do you? Mr. Culpepper said suddenly. I'll prove it to you. When I was physician to Say's horse and fought the king, or rather the man, Charles Stuart, in Oxfordshire, I had my learning at Cambridge. He's highlighting enmity. Did you notice? The plague was very hot all round us. I saw it at close hands. He who says I am ignorant of the plague, for example, is altogether beside the bridge. That's an unusual saying, obviously, of his time. We grant it, said Puck solemnly, but why talk of the plague this rare night? To prove my argument, this Oxfordshire plague, good people, being generated among rivers and ditches, was of a wearish, watery nature. Therefore it was curable by drenching the patient in cold water and laying him in wet cloths, or at least so I cured some of them. Mark this, it bears on what shall come after. So he's saying that people being sick with the plague, when he treated them with a cold, wet drenching of one form or another, actually cured them. So we'll carry on. Mark also, Nick, said Puck, that we are not your college of physicians, but only a lad and a lass and a poor lubberkin. Therefore be plain, old hyssop of the wall. To be plain, and and in order with you, I was shot in the chest while gathering of betony from a brookside near Tame, and was took by the king's men before their colonel, one Blag or Bragg, whom I warned honestly that I had spent the week past among our plague-stricken. He flung me off into a cowshed, much like this here, to die, as I supposed, but one of their priests crept in by night and dressed my wound. He was a Sussex man like myself. Who was that? Said Puck suddenly. Zack Toucham? No, Jack Margaret, said Mr. Culpepper. Jack Margate of New College, the little merry man that stammered so. Why, a plague was stuttering of Jack at Oxford then, said Puck. He had come out of Sussex in hope of being made a bishop when the king should have conquered the rebels, as he styled us Parliament men. His college had lent the king some moneys too, which they never got again, no more than simple Jack got his bishopric. When we met, he had had a bitter bellyful of king's promises and wished to return to his wife and babes. This came about beyond expectation, for so soon as I could stand of my wound, the man Blag made excuse that I had been among the plague and Jack had been tending me, to thrust us both out from their camp. The king had done with Jack now that Jack's college had lent the money, and Blag's physician could not abide me because I would not sit silent and see him butcher the sick. He was a college of physicians man. Obviously they had different sorts of training, and there was enmity between them, antipathy, if you will. So Blag, I say, thrust us both out with many vile words for a pair of pestilence-prating, pragmatical rascals. Ha! Call you pragmatical, Nick? Puck started up. High time Oliver came to purge the land. That's Oliver Cromwell. How did you and honest Jack fare next? Puck has a tendency to draw stories out of people, which helps the children to understand some of their history. We were in some sort constrained to each other's company. I was for going to my house in Spitalfields, that's in London now, it's an area within London, now considered to be London. I was for going to my house in Spitalfields. He would go to his parish in Sussex, but the plague was broke out and spreading through Wiltshire, Berkshire and Hampshire, and he was so mad distracted to think that it might even be among his folks at home that I bore him company. He had comforted me in my distress. I could not have done less, and I remembered that I had a cousin at Great Wigsell, near by Jack's parish. Thus we footed it from Oxford, cassock and buff coat together, resolute to leave wars on the left side henceforth, and either through our mean appearances or the plague making men less cruel, we were not hindered. Sorry, I'm hiccuping. I'm just going to find you the bit about the book because I think it actually references this. Sorry, on Wikipedia it talks about the different sections of the book. Here's your link to the Wikipedia listing for this book. And you can have that open in the background or whatever. I shall find this. Oh yeah, this is the reference. This is why I was looking it up, because I had read this before. Nicholas Culpepper explains how he stopped the plague in a Sussex village by I won't tell you how, that's a spoiler. Culpepper was already dead by the time of the Great Plague of London, which was 1665 through to 1666. But there were lesser outbreaks, that means smaller outbreaks, that were fairly common during his lifetime. So people who know a little bit of history might say, well, this is a twisting of history because he's talking about the plague. No, it's not a twisting of history. The plague was already existent in England. It's just that most of the time the only version of it that we hear about is the Great Plague of London, which is the really big one, really big outbreak of it. Right, so I'm going to carry on reading and we're going to find out what happened, because I'm pretty sure it's got to do with the plague, since that's what he's already talking about. Where do we get to? Either through our mean appearances or the plague making men less cruel, we were not hindered. To be sure, they put us in the stocks 1/2 day for rogues and vagabonds at a village under St. Leonard's Forest, where, as I have heard, nightingales never sing. But the constable very honestly gave me back my astrological almanac, which I carry with me. Mr. Culpepper tapped his thin chest. I dressed a Whitlow on his thumb. So we went forward. So therefore, because he had actually helped the constable, that means the man who was enforcing the law in that local town or village, the man had been quite happy to let them go. Whitlow. What is a Whitlow? Whitlow is a very painful and infectious viral disease of the thumb and fingertips. It's a self-limiting disease. I have no idea. So it's obviously it's an infection of the tip of the finger or thumb. And so he had dealt with it for the chap, which meant that his finger got better, and so he'd willingly let the two guys go. It can cause a type of abscess. Yeah, there's nothing else there that's useful. I was looking to see if I could find a modern name for it. I can't. I've never heard of it before. Have you? Anyway, so he let them go. I dressed a Whitlow on his thumb, so we went forward. Not to trouble you with impertinences, we fetched over against Jack Margaret's parish, Margate, not Margaret, against Jack Margaret's parish in a storm of rain about the day's end. Here our roads divided, for I would have gone on to my cousin at Great Wigsell, but while Jack was pointing me out his steeple, we saw a man lying drunk, as he conceived, athwart the road. That means across the road. He said it would be one Hebden, a parishioner, and till then a man of good life, and he accused himself bitterly for an unfaithful shepherd that had left his flock to follow princes, but I saw that it was the plague, and not the beginnings of it neither. They had set out the plague stone, and the man's head lay on it. What is a plague stone? Dan whispered. When the plague is so hot in a village that the neighbours shut the roads against them, people set a hollowed stone pot or pan where such as would purchase victual from outside may lay money and the paper of their wants, and depart. Those that would sell come later, but what will a man not do for gain? Snatch the money forth and leave in exchange such goods as their conscience reckons fair value. I saw a silver groat in the water, and the man's list of what he would buy was rain pulped in his wet hand. So what they would do was there was a hollow in the top of the stone, and they had water in the hollow, and then their money was put into the water to therefore kill any disease that was on it, or to banish any disease, because they didn't understand germs like we do. Banish the disease so that the money was then safe to be able to be taken to purchase things for them. That was the idea. Right, carrying on. My wife, oh my wife and babes, says Jack of a sudden, and makes uphill, I with him. So Jack was worried about his family, because if there's a man with the plague at the outskirts of town, that means that quite possibly the plague is sweeping through this village. A woman peers out from behind a barn, crying out that the village is stricken with the plague, and that for our lives' sake we must avoid it. Sweetheart, says Jack, must I avoid thee? And she leaps at him and says the babes are safe. She was his wife. When he had thanked God, even to tears, he tells me that this is not the welcome he had intended, and presses me to flee the place while I was clean. Nay, the Lord do say to me, Nay, the Lord do so to me, and more also, if I desert thee now, I said. These affairs are, under God's leave, in some fashion, my strength. I'm a physician. I'm a doctor. This is what I'm meant to do. Oh, sir, she says, are you a physician? We have none. Then, good people, said I must e'en justify myself to you by my works. Look ye, stammers Jack, I took you all this time for a crazy roundhead preacher. He laughs, and she, and then I, all three together in the rain, are overtook by an unreasonable gust, or clap of laughter, which none the less eased us. We call it in medicine the hysterical passion. So I went home with him. Why did you not go to your cousin at Great Wigsell, Nick? Puck suggested. 'Tis barely 7 mile up the road. But the plague was here, Mr. Culpepper answered, and pointed up the hill. What else could I have done? Okay, let's see if we can find in a map, shall we? Where's Wigsell? Maps. This is how you learn lots of things beyond just what they tell you at school. You don't have to stop learning at school when you've finished school either. You can take learning from lots of things and find out more and have lots of interesting adventures. Great Wigsell. I don't know if it... Oh, I was going to say I don't know if it's a real place or not, but apparently it is a real place. Great Wigsell, Roberts Bridge. It's an area. Near Burwash, which is why he was saying, why Puck said it's only 7 miles that way, and Culpepper had said that the plague was here, so that's why he had to deal with it. So yeah, okay, doesn't look like it's a particularly big or busy place. On the map here, it's just got couple of houses. There may have been a whole village there at some stage. Or it may just be that Mr. Kipling decided that would be a good place to make the centre of this particular story. We'll carry on, shall we? But the plague was here, Mr. Culpepper answered and pointed up the hill. What else could I have done? What were the parson's children called? Said Una. Elizabeth, Alison, Stephen, and Charles. A babe. I scarce saw them at first, for I separated to live with their father in a cart lodge, because these guys had come into the village and they were not ill, and so therefore it was probably safer for them to stay separate enough to not get ill. Maybe. We don't know. We'll find out. The mother we put forced into the house with her babes. She had done enough. And now, good people, give me leave to be particular in this case. The plague was the worst on the north side of the street, for lack, as I showed him, of sunshine, which proceeded from the primum mobile, or source of life. I speak astrologically, is cleansing and purifying in the highest degree. The plague was hot too by the corn chandlers, where they sell forage for the carters, extreme hot in both mills along the river, and scatteringly in other places, except, mark you, at the smithy. Mark here that all forges and smith shops belong to Mars, even as corn and meat and wine shops acknowledge Venus for their mistress. There was no plague in the smithy at Mundy's Lane. Mundy's Lane? You mean our village? I thought so when you talked about the 2 mills, cried Dan. Where did we put the plague stone? I'd like to have seen it. Then look at it now, said Puck, and pointed to the chickens' drinking trough, where they had set their bicycle lamps. It was a rough, oblong stone pan, rather like a small kitchen sink, which Phillips, who never wastes anything, had found in a ditch and had used for his precious hens. That, said Dan and Una, and stared and stared and stared. Mr. Culpepper made impatient noises in his throat and went on. I am at these pains to be particular, good people, because I would have you follow, so far as you may, the operations of my mind. That plague which I told you I had handled outside Wallingford in Oxfordshire was of a watery nature, conformable to the brookish riverine country it bred in, and curable, as I have said, by drenching in water. This plague of ours here, for all that it flourished along watercourses, every soul at both mills died of it, could not be so handled, which brought me to a stand. And your sick people in the meantime? Puck demanded. We persuaded them on the north side of the street to lie out in Hitheram's field, where the plague had taken one or at most two in a house. Folk would not shift for fear of thieves in their absence. They cast away their lives to die among their goods. Human nature, said Puck. I've seen it time and again. How did your sick do in the fields? They died not near so thick as those that kept within doors, and even then they died more out of distraction and melancholy than of plague. But I confess, good people, I could not in any sort master the sickness, or come at a glimmer of its nature or governance. To be brief, I was flat bewildered at the brute malignity of the disease, and so did what I should have done before, dismissed all conjectures and apprehensions that had grown up within me, chose a good hour by my almanac, clapped my vinegar cloth to my face, and entered some empty houses, resigned to wait upon the stars for guidance. At night, were you not horribly frightened? Said Puck. I dared to hope that the God who had made man so nobly curious to search out his mysteries might not destroy a devout seeker. In due time, there is a time, as I have said, for everything under the sun, I spied a whitish rat, very puffed and scabby, which sat beneath the dormer of an attic through which shined Our Lady the Moon. Whilst I looked on him and her, she was moving towards old, cold Saturn, her ancient ally. The rat creeped languishingly into her light, and there before my eyes died. Presently his mate or companion came out, laid him down beside there, and in like fashion died too. Later, an hour or less to midnight, a third rat did e'en the same, always choosing the moonlight to die in. This threw me into an amaze, since, as we know, the moonlight is favourable, not hurtful, to the creatures of the moon, and Saturn, being friends with her, as you would say, was hourly strengthening her evil influence. Yet these three rats had been stricken dead in very moonlight. I leaned out of the window to see which of heaven's host might be on our side, and there I beheld good trusty Mars, very red and heated, bustling about his setting. I straddled the roof to see better. Margaret came up the street, going to comfort our sick in Hitheram's field. A tile slipped under my foot. Says he heavily enough, "Watchman, what of the night?" "Heart up, Jack," says I, "methinks there's one fighting for us, that, like a fool, I forgot all this summer." My meaning was naturally the planet Mars. "Pray to him, then," says he. "I forgot him too this summer." He meant God, whom he always bitterly accused himself of having forgotten up in Oxfordshire among the king's men. I called down that he had made amends enough for his sin by his work among the sick, but he said he would not believe so till the plague was lifted from him. He was at his strength's end, more from melancholy than any just cause. I have seen this before among priests and over-cheerful men. I drenched him then and there with half a cup of waters, which I do not say cure the plague, but are excellent against heaviness of the spirits. "What were they?" said Dan. "White brandy, rectified, camphor, cardamoms, ginger, 2 sorts of pepper, and aniseed." "Phew," said Puck. "Waters, you call 'em?" Jack coughed on it valiantly and went downhill with me. I was for the lower mill in the valley to note the aspect of the heavens. My mind had already shadowed forth the reason, if not the remedy, for our troubles, but I would not impart it to the vulgar till I was satisfied. That practice may be perfect, judgment ought to be sound, and to make judgment sound is required an exquisite knowledge. I left Jack and his lantern among the sick at Hitheram's Field. He still maintained the prayers of the so-called church, which were rightly forbidden by Cromwell. You should have told your cousin at Wixell, said Puck, and Jack would have been fined for it, and you'd have had half the money for having turned someone in. How did you come to fail in your duty, Nick? Mr. Culpepper laughed, his only laugh that evening, and the children jumped at the loud neigh of it. We were not fearful of men's judgment in those days, he answered. Now mark me closely, good people, for what follows will be to you, though not to me, remarkable. When I reached the empty mill, old Saturn, low down in the house of the Fishers, threatened the sun's rising place. The house of the Fishers, that's in Pisces. Threatened the sun's rising place. Our Lady of the Moon was moving towards the help of him. Understand, I speak astrologically. I looked abroad upon the high heavens, and I prayed the Maker of them for guidance. Now Mars sparklingly withdrew himself below the sky. Set. On the instant of his departure, which I noted, a bright star or vapour leapt forth above his head as though he had heaved up his sword, and broke all about in fire. The cocks crowed midnight through the valley, and I sat me down by the mill-wheel, chewing spearmint, though that's a herb of Venice, and calling myself all the asses' heads in the world. 'Twas plain enough now. What was plain? Said Una. The true cause and cure of the plague. Mars, good fellow, had fought for us to the uttermost, faint though he had been in the heavens, and this had made me overlook him in my computations. He, more than any of the other planets, had kept the heavens, which is to say, had been visible some part of each night well nigh throughout the year. Therefore his fierce and cleansing influence, warring against the moon, had stretched out to kill those 3 rats under my nose, and under the nose of their natural mistress, the moon. I had known Mars lean half across heaven to deal our Lady Moon some shrewd blow from under his shield, but I had never before seen his strength displayed so effectual. I don't understand a bit. Do you mean Mars killed the rats because he hated the moon? Said Una. That is as plain as the pikestaff with which Blagg's men pushed me forth, Mr. Culpepper answered. I'll prove it. Why had the plague not broken out at the blacksmith's shop in Maundy's Lane? Because, as I've shown you, forges and smithies belong naturally to Mars. And for his honour's sake, Mars would keep him clean from the creatures of the moon. But was it like, think you, that he'd come down and rat-catch in general for lazy, ungrateful mankind? There was working a willing horse to death. So then you can see that the meaning of the blazing star above him when he set was simply this: destroy and burn the creatures of the moon, for they are at the root of your trouble. And thus, having shown you a taste of my power, good people, adieu. Did Mars really say all that? Una whispered. Yes, and twice as much as that to anyone who had ears to hear. Briefly, he enlightened me that the plague was spread by the creatures of the moon. The moon, our lady of ill aspect, was that offender. My own poor wits showed me that I, Nick Culpepper, had the people in my charge, God's good providence aiding me, and no time to lose neither. I posted up the hill and broke into Hitheram's Field, amongst 'em all at prayers. Eureka, good people, I cried, and cast down a dead mill rat which I'd found. Here's your true enemy, revealed at last by the stars. Nay, but I'm praying, says Jack. His face was as white as washed silver. There's a time for everything under the sun, says I, and if you would stay the plague, take and kill your rats. Oh, mad, stark mad, says he, and wrings his hands. A fellow lay in the ditch beside him, who bellows that he'd as soon die mad hunting rats as be preached to death on a cold fallow field. They laughed round him at this, but Jack Marget falls on his knees and very presumptuously petitions that he may be appointed to die to save the rest of his people. This was enough to thrust him back into their melancholy. You are an unfaithful shepherd, Jack, I says. Take a bat. which we call a stick in Sussex, and kill a rat if you die before sunrise. 'Twill save your people. Aye, aye, take a bat and kill a rat, he says 10 times over like a child, which moved him to ungovernable motions of that hysterical passion before mentioned, so that they laughed all, and at last warmed their chill bloods at that very hour, 1 o'clock or a little thereafter, when the fires of life burn lowest. In other words, when people are the most down, the most depressed, because it's the middle of the night. Here they are laughing. Truly there is a time for everything, and the physician must work with it, or miss his cure. To be brief with you, I persuaded him, sick or sound, to have at the whole generation of rats throughout the village. And there's a reason for all things too, though the wise physician need not blab 'em all. Imprimis, or firstly, the mere sport of it, which lasted 10 days, drew 'em most markedly out of their melancholy. Sorry. It gave them a sense of something to do, a focus, which, yes, would actually affect how they felt. I'd defy sorrowful Job himself to lament or scratch while he's routing rats from a rick. That's a hay rick or a haystack. Secundo, or secondly, the vehement act and operation of this chase or war opened their skins to generous transpiration, more vulgarly, sweated 'em handsomely, and thus further drew off their black bile, the mother of sickness. Thirdly, when we came to burn the bodies of the rats, I sprinkled sulphur on the faggots, that's the bundles of wood, firewood, whereby the onlookers were as handsomely suffumigated. This I could not have compassed if I had made it a mere physician's business. They'd have thought it some conjuration. Yet more, we cleansed, limed, and burned out 100 foul poke-holes, sinks, sloughs, and corners of unvisited filth in and about the homes in the village, and by good fortune, mark here, that Mars was in opposition to Venus, burned the corn chandler's shop to the ground. Mars loves not Venus. Will Noakes, the saddler, dropped his lantern on a truss of straw while he was rat hunting there. Had ye given Will any of that gentle cordial of yours, Nick, by any chance? Said Puck. A glass or 2 glasses, not more, but as I would say, in fine, when we had killed the rats, I took ash, slag, and charcoal from the smithy, and burnt earth from the brickyard, I reason that a brickyard belongs to Mars, and rammed it with iron crowbars into the rat runs and buries, and beneath all the house floors. The creatures of the moon hate all that Mars hath used for his own clean ends. For example, rats bite not iron. And how did poor stuttering Jack endure it? Said Puck. He sweated out his melancholy through his skin, and catched a loose cough, which I cured with electuaries, according to art. It is noteworthy, where I speak among my equals, that the venom of the plague translated or turned itself into and evaporated or went away as a very heavy hoarseness and thickness of the head, throat, and chest. Observe from my books which planets govern these portions of man's body, and your darkness, good people, shall be illuminated. None the less the plague, qua plague, seized and took off, for we only lost 3 more, and 2 of 'em had it already on 'em, from the morning of the day that Mars enlightened me by the lower mill. He coughed, almost trumpeted it, triumphantly. It is proved, he jerked out. I say I have proved my contention, which is that by divine astrology and humble search into the veritable causes of things, at the proper time, the sons of wisdom may combat even the plague. Said Puck. For my own part, I hold that a simple soul— Mine? Simple? Forsooth, said Mr. Culpepper. A very simple soul, high courage, tempered with sound and stubborn conceit, is stronger than all the stars in their courses. So I confess truly that you saved the village, Nick. I stubborn? I stiff-necked? I ascribed all my poor success under God's good providence to divine astrology. Not to me the glory. You talk as that dear weeping ass Jack Margate preached before I went back to my work in Red Lion House, Spitalfields. Oh, stammering Jack preached, did he? They say he loses his stammer in the pulpit. And his wits with it. He delivered a most idolatrous discourse when the plague was stayed. He took for his text, the wise man that delivered the city. I could have given him a better, such as there is a time for. But what made you go to church to hear him? Puck interrupted. Well, Attersall was your lawfully appointed preacher, and a dull dog he was. Mr. Culpepper wriggled uneasily. The vulgar, said he, the old crones and the children, Alison and the others, they dragged me to the house of Rimmon by the hand. I was in two minds to inform on Jack for maintaining the mummeries of the falsely called church, which I'll prove to you are founded merely on ancient fables. Stick to your herbs and planets, said Puck, laughing. You should have told the magistrates, Nick, and had Jack fined. And again, why did you neglect your plain duty? Because I was kneeling and praying and weeping with the rest of 'em at the altar rails. In medicine this is called the hysterical passion. It may be. That is as may be, said Puck. They heard him turn the hay. Why, your hay is half hedge brishings, he said. You don't expect a horse to thrive on oak, ash and thorn leaves, do you? Ping, ping, ping went the bicycle bell round the corner. Nurse was coming back from the mill. Is it all right? Una called. All quite right, the nurse called back. They're to be christened next Sunday. What? What? They both leaned forward across the half door. It could not have been properly fastened, for it opened and tilted them out with hay and leaves sticking out all over them. Come on, we must get those two twins' names, said Una, and they charged uphill, shouting over the hedge, till Nurse slowed up and told them. When they returned, old Middenborough had got out of his stall, and they spent a lively 10 minutes chasing him in again by starlight. And that's the end of today's story section. So, oak, ash and thorn is the thing that stops the children from being able to see Puck and whoever he brings again. So, the plague, he got rid of the rats, which is what got rid of the plague in that village, stopped it spreading further. He thought it was because the rats were creatures of the night, and therefore creatures that were under the thumb of the moon, who was evil, basically. In actual fact, he got rid of the rats, which got rid of the fleas, which are the creatures that were carrying the plague. So he thought it was one cause, it was actually another cause, but he did the right thing, even if he didn't understand why. So I wonder if there is anything about Culpepper and the plague in this bit here. Philosophy of herbalism. Partial list of works. I am not going to read the partial list of works. His legacy. Culpepper's translations and approach to using herbals have had an extensive impact on medicine in early North American colonies and even modern medications. Culpepper was one of the first to translate from Latin documents discussing medicinal plants found in the Americas. His herbal was held in such high esteem that species he described were introduced into the New World from England. Culpepper described the medical use of foxglove, the botanical precursor to digitalis, which is used for, I think it's blood-thinning properties for people who have heart attacks easily. I'm not sure. Used to treat heart conditions. His influence is demonstrated by the existence of a chain of Culpepper herb and spice shops in Canada, North America and beyond, and by the continued popularity of his remedies among New Age and alternative holistic medicine practitioners. So there you go. Now I'm going to read the poem that comes at the end of this section, and then we'll be done for today. Okay, our fathers of old. Excellent herbs had our fathers of old, excellent herbs to ease their pain. Alexander's and marigold, eyebright, orris, and elecampane. These are all the names of plants, herbal plants. Basil, rocket, valerian, rue, almost singing themselves they run. Vervain, dittany, call me to you. Cowslip, melilot, rose of the sun. Anything green that grew out of the mould, that means the rotted down plants, earth mould. The leaves that compost themselves. I've forgotten the other term for it, sorry. Anything green that grew out of the mould was an excellent herb to our fathers of old. Wonderful tales had our fathers of old, wonderful tales of the herbs and the stars. The sun was the lord of the marigold. Basil and rocket belonged to Mars. Pat as a sum, in division it goes, every plant had a star bespoke. Who but Venus should govern the rose? Who but Jupiter own the oak? Simply and gravely the facts are told in the wonderful books of our fathers of old. Wonderful little when all is said, wonderful little our fathers knew, half their remedies cured you dead. Most of their teaching was quite untrue. Look at the stars when a patient is ill, dirt has nothing to do with disease. That's what they thought. Bleed and blister as much as you will, blister and bleed him as oft as you please, whence enormous and manifold errors were made by our fathers of old. Yet when the sickness was sore in the land, and neither planet nor herb assuaged, they took their lives in their lance at hand, and oh, what a wonderful war they waged. Yes, when the crosses were chalked on the door, yes, when the terrible dead cart rolled. That's the cart that collects the bodies. Excellent courage our fathers bore, excellent heart had our fathers of old. None too learned, but nobly bold, into the fight went our fathers of old. If it be certain, as Galen says, and sage Hippocrates holds as much, that those afflicted by doubts and dismays are mightily helped by a dead man's touch, then be good to us, stars above, then be good to us, herbs below. We are afflicted by what we can prove, we are distracted by what we know. So. Down from your heaven or up from your mould, send us the hearts of our fathers of old. Just putting their views of the world into perspective. There you go. And that's the end of today's story. It's a little bit about Nicholas Culpepper, who was a famous herbalist, and had other aspects of what he believed that influenced what he did in terms of being a herbalist. And we have learnt from it. We have used some of the information that he developed. We have used some of the information that the conclusions that he came to, but we have also learned from that point forwards. And I'm so glad that we're not stuck back there with the way that sort of thing was done with the medicines and the various other beliefs that were influencing people. So next time we will be reading something called Simple Simon. I'm not sure if it has anything to do with the kids' poem about Simple Simon. I'm just going to scroll. Doesn't tell me. I really don't know. We'll find out, won't we? Simple Simon. I wonder what that one is. Anyway, it's been really great having you listening, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Don't forget, in the meantime, find yourself something fun to read, somewhere to give your head some space. And thank you for listening. Don't forget, have a look at other stories that I've already done over on YouTube, and there's probably still a week's worth of stories here on Twitch. See you next time.